Welcome, dear listeners, to The Case of the Smiling Mask, a Sherlock Holmes Halloween special. Tonight, mystery and illusion intertwine in a tale where theater turns deadly and genius walks hand in hand with madness. Where are you listening from? Let us know in the comments, and welcome to the stage, where even truth wears a disguise. It was upon a night of thick autumn fog, the kind that rolls like grey smoke through the gaslit streets of London, that the strange affair of the mask that smiled in the dark began. I remember it well, for the mist had crept even into Baker Street, swirling around the lamplight outside our sitting room and muffling the steady clip-clop of cabs beyond. Inside, Holmes sat cross-legged upon the hearthrug, a violin across his knees and a long sheet of correspondence scattered about his slippers. He was in one of his restless moods, the kind that often heralded the arrival of something singular. I had just laid aside the evening paper when the door burst open, and our landlady, Mrs. Hudson, ushered in a most extraordinary visitor. The man was wrapped in a black traveling cloak, his hands trembling as though from cold or fear. Beneath his arm he carried a curious object, a velvet case about the size of a small hat box. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he asked, his voice a dry whisper. Holmes inclined his head but said nothing. He had already risen, his grey eyes darting from the man's shaking fingers to the peculiar glint of metal clasping the case. "My name is Mr. Percival Endicott," the visitor continued. "I come to you from Street, Dunstan's Theatre. Something dreadful has occurred, and Scotland Yard refuses to take it seriously. But I assure you, sir, it's a matter of death, perhaps more than one." Holmes gestured to the chair opposite. "Pray sit down, Mr. Endicott, and if you value clarity, begin not with fears but with facts." Endicott sank heavily into the chair. "We're staging a Halloween performance, an old Gothic piece. The Smiling Mask. It's meant to be frightful, a thing of shadows and tricks of light. Yet tonight, before the rehearsal ended, one of our actors, Mr. Basil Trent, was found dead upon the stage. And he was wearing this." He placed the velvet case on the table and opened it. Inside lay a mask of ivory white porcelain, smooth and elegant save for the smile. It was not a pleasant expression, but a fixed, exaggerated curve that seemed to mock the very notion of human joy. Under the lamplight, that grin seemed almost alive. Watson leaned forward involuntarily. "Good heavens, what an uncanny thing." Holmes bent low, his expression unreadable. "A theatre prop, you say?" "Yes," Endicott murmured. "It was meant for the final act. But no one knows how it came to be upon Trent's face, or why his lips beneath were twisted in the same grotesque smile when we removed it." Holmes's hand hovered over the mask, stopping just short of touching it. "And the cause of death?" "The doctor called it sudden heart failure. But Basil was young, barely 30, and the healthiest among us. What's more," Endicott swallowed, "there was a faint scent of gas about him. Not the usual theatre fumes. Something different." Holmes's eyes flickered toward me. "Interesting, Watson. Note that the scent, the expression, and the theatrical setting. Continue, Mr. Endicott." Endicott's voice quavered. "There's another thing, sir. After we found him, the theatre caretaker swore he saw a man in a black cloak watching from the gallery. When he called out, the figure merely turned, and I swear to you, Mr. Holmes, it was wearing the same mask." Holmes leaned back, steepling his fingers. A masked observer at the scene of death. "Did anyone pursue him?" "No. By the time they reached the gallery, it was empty." Silence filled the room for a moment, save for the crackle of the fire. Then Holmes rose abruptly and crossed to the window. He stood there, staring into the fog, his reflection a ghost in the glass. "You say this performance is scheduled for All Hallows' Eve?" he asked without turning. "Yes." "Tomorrow night?" Holmes tapped the window pane, thoughtfully. "A stage death on the eve of Halloween, too symbolic to be mere coincidence. Tell me, Mr. Endicott, who stands to gain by the actor's demise?" "Gain?" Endicott looked bewildered. "Why, no one. Basil was well liked, a little vain perhaps, but harmless. Holmes turned sharply. In my experience, vanity is seldom harmless. It blinds men to motives hidden in plain sight. Tell me of the others in the company. There's Miss Clara Vane, our leading lady, Mr. Horace Blythe, the stage director, and myself, the proprietor. Oh, and a newcomer, Mr. Gerard Vale, who joined us only last week. Holmes's expression darkened with a hint of amusement. A convenient week for a death. Mr. Holmes, the theatre feels cursed. Half the staff refuses to come tomorrow. I beg you come tonight. See the place yourself. Perhaps you will find what the police ignore. Holmes turned toward me. Watson, your medical bag, if you please. We may have need of it before dawn. An hour later, we were rattling through the fog in a hansom cab, the lamplight outside cutting pale tunnels through the darkness. Endicott sat opposite us, wringing his hands. You must think me mad, he muttered, but there's something wrong in that theatre. The air feels wrong. The shadows move. Holmes smiled faintly. Every shadow in London moves if you stare long enough. The question is, who moves it? We arrived at Street Dunstan's shortly after midnight. The theatre loomed against the mist like some sleeping creature, its facade half swallowed by darkness. Inside, the great auditorium was empty, save for the echo of our footsteps. Upon the stage, a faint light burned near the painted scenery, a flickering gas lamp left unattended. Holmes ascended the stage with the quiet assurance of a man entering a laboratory. He moved about with his magnifying glass, studying the boards, the curtains, the mask case left in the wings. I followed, my nerves on edge. Something in that vast silence felt indeed uncanny. There, Watson, Holmes said softly, kneeling beside a faint dark patch on the floorboards. Residue of soot or perhaps smoke. Do you detect the smell? I bent closer. A chemical tang, acrid. Holmes nodded. Not ordinary gas. Something mixed. Perhaps chloroform vaporized or an irritant compound. And here, note the scuff on the mask's inner rim. He held the porcelain up to the light, revealing a tiny metal pin near the nostril slit. A mechanical device, Holmes murmured, eyes glittering. Possibly a trigger, ingenious and deadly. I stared at him. You mean the mask itself? Precisely, my dear Watson, a smiling death, delivered through artifice and design. Holmes rose slowly, his face grave. The performance may yet have another act, and I fear the true villain has not taken his bow. As we rode back through the sleeping streets of London, I could not shake the image of that mask's frozen grin. The cab wheels clattered faintly against the stones, the fog parting like a curtain before our lamps. Holmes sat beside me in silence, his fingers tapping the edge of his cane in rhythm with his thoughts. I knew the look well. It meant that his mind was already far ahead, darting between possibilities like a chess player rehearsing moves in the dark. When we reached Baker Street, he went straight to his desk without removing his coat, spreading a fresh sheet of paper and setting the mask gently upon it. The gaslight flickered across its pale surface, giving the illusion that it might smile again at any moment. Holmes fetched a small vial from the chemical shelf and uncorked it. Hydrochloric vapor, Watson observed. He held the mouth of the bottle near the nostril slits. A faint hiss emerged, followed by a thread of thin white smoke. Holmes smiled faintly. There it is, the residue of a gas compound, possibly chloroform infused with ether. I dare say it was timed or triggered by pressure. The wearer, once the pin was released, would have inhaled the poison within seconds. I shuddered. You mean to say Basil Trent was murdered by the very mask he was meant to wear? Holmes did not look up. It would seem so. But the real question, my dear Watson, is who placed it there? And why should the killer employ such theatrical cruelty? To murder a man upon a stage, hidden in plain sight, and make his death a performance. That speaks of calculation, not passion. He sat back, lighting his pipe, the smoke curling through the lamplight like threads of thought made visible. Consider the facts. Trent dies during rehearsal. The mask intended as a harmless prop has been transformed into a weapon. There is evidence of tampering, a trace of chemical gas, and a mysterious figure seen fleeing in the same mask. Each point forms a line, but where does that line lead? I ventured. Perhaps jealousy among the troupe? Such rivalries are common on the stage. Holmes nodded. Quite so, and therefore, too obvious. Still, we must examine every motive that might lurk behind the curtain. Tomorrow morning, we shall visit Street Dunstan's again and speak with the surviving members of the company. But before that, he reached for the theatre program Endicott had left. Let us acquaint ourselves with the dramatis personae. The list was short. Mr. Horace Blythe, stage director, Miss Clara Vane, leading lady, Mr. Gerard Vale, newcomer, and Percival Endicott, the theatre's proprietor. Holmes studied the names in silence. Blythe has the authority to alter props. Miss Vane may have shared close relations with the AP, deceased. Vale, being new, offers the perfect disguise of ignorance. And Endicott, though seemingly distraught, holds the theatre's purse strings and possibly more. He leaned back, eyes half closed. Tomorrow, we will learn which of these masks conceals the true face of guilt. The fire crackled low, throwing long shadows upon the floor. I could tell Holmes's mind had not ceased its restless turning, even as he sat perfectly still. After some minutes, he spoke again softly, as though to himself. "It is the smiling that troubles me, Watson. Why that particular expression? A man dies in terror, yet his lips twist upward. The murderer has a sense of irony or ritual." "Ritual," I repeated. Holmes turned toward me, the faintest glimmer of excitement in his eyes. "Yes, you recall that the play itself was called The Smiling Mask? The killer imitates its fiction, merging theater and reality until death itself becomes an act. It is not murder alone, it is message." "And the masked figure the caretaker saw?" Holmes's expression hardened. "That, my dear fellow, was no coincidence. He wished to be seen. Theatrical minds crave an audience. We are dealing with a performer of crime, an artist, perhaps, in his own dark craft." He rose, placing the porcelain mask back into its case. "Tomorrow, we enter his theater. But let us remember the stage is not the only place where men wear masks." As he spoke, the fog outside thickened, swallowing even the glow of the street lamps. I watched him pace by the window, his tall figure outlined against the dim glass, and thought how fitting it was that the world's greatest detective should prepare for battle against a killer who hid behind a smile. The case had already begun to weave its sinister web, and I, for one, could feel the first threads tightening around us both. The following morning dawned grey and heavy with mist, the kind that clung to every lamppost and window pane like a veil. Holmes was up before me, already dressed in his long grey coat, the mask case tucked neatly under his arm. A telegram lay upon the breakfast tray, addressed to him in a trembling hand. He opened it silently, his eyes darting across the page, and a faint smile flickered across his face. "Ah, Watson, our stage awaits us. Endicott requests our immediate presence. Apparently, there has been another development. The curtain rises sooner than expected." We arrived at Street Dunstan's theatre just after 9. The streets were half empty, the gaslight still burning despite the hour, and the theatre itself looked more like a mausoleum than a place of laughter. Inside, the air was chill and thick with the scent of paint and dust. Endicott met us at the foyer, pale and dishevelled, as though he had not slept. "Mr. Holmes, thank heaven you've come. There's been another incident." Holmes handed him his hat and strode briskly forward. "Show me." Endicott led us through the dim corridors to a narrow dressing room behind the stage. The door stood ajar, and upon the floor lay a sheet of crumpled paper, part of a script. Holmes bent and picked it up. Scrawled across it, in smeared ink, were the words, "The mask smiles for those who lie." Beneath, a small drawing of the same grinning mask had been sketched in haste. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Who found this?" "Miss Clara Vane," Endicott whispered. She came early to rehearse. The note was left on her mirror. She's in quite a state, says she saw a shadow move outside her door not 10 minutes before you arrived. Holmes moved to the dressing table. Its mirror was cracked at one corner, and a faint smear of soot ran across the glass like a finger's trace. A message, a threat, and a trace of soot again, he murmured. Our killer is not content to have struck once. He seeks attention, admiration, even. Watson, the play is his stage, and every actor his puppet. We followed Endicott to the main floor, where the company waited in uneasy silence. Miss Clara Vane sat near the orchestra pit, her face pale as marble beneath her red hair. She clutched a handkerchief in trembling fingers. Holmes approached her gently. Miss Vane, I understand you were close to Mr. Trent. She nodded faintly. We had worked together for years. He was ambitious, yes, but kind. I cannot imagine who would wish him harm. Holmes studied her with quiet intensity. And yet, someone left this note in your room. It mentions lies. Tell me, had Mr. Trent any enemies within your company? Clara's eyes flicked toward the corner where Horace Blythe stood, arms folded, his expression unreadable. Mr. Blythe and Basil had quarreled only last week, she whispered. About the script. Basil wanted to change a scene. Horace refused. It grew ugly. Holmes turned to Blythe. You admit this argument? Blythe's mouth tightened. Yes. Actors always want to rewrite what they don't understand, but that hardly makes me a murderer. Quite so, Holmes said mildly. Yet you alone, as stage director, have access to the props before rehearsal. Tell me, who last handled the mask? Blythe hesitated. It was Mr. Vale, the new man. He offered to polish it for the scene. Holmes's eyes sharpened. Mr. Vale. A tall, thin figure stepped forward from the shadows, a man of pale complexion and calm, almost too calm, demeanor. Yes, sir, he said evenly. I was instructed to prepare the costume and props, I assure you. I touched nothing unusual. Holmes regarded him in silence for a long moment. You are new to the company, I hear. Where did you work before this? Vale's lips curved slightly. At the Royal Pavilion, Mr. Holmes. Stagecraft and mechanical effects. Holmes's gaze flickered, and I could almost hear the machinery of his mind turning. Ah, mechanical effects. Then you are familiar with gas, mechanisms, hidden triggers, timed releases, all manner of illusions designed to startle an audience. Vale inclined his head coolly. That is my profession. Holmes smiled without warmth. Indeed. Then perhaps you can tell me why there is a residue of ether upon the mask you so carefully prepared. The man's calm faltered for a fraction of a second, just enough for Holmes to notice. Watson, Holmes said quietly. I believe we have found our technician, but whether he be culprit or instrument remains to be seen. Vale's face stiffened. Are you accusing me? Holmes shook his head. Accuse? Never. I merely observe that those who design illusions often forget that some eyes see through smoke. He turned to Endicott. No one leaves the theater, not until I say so. The smiling mask has yet to reveal its final performer, and I intend to watch every movement until it does. The words hung in the air like the chill of the fog outside, and for the first time, I felt that we were not merely hunting a killer, but standing upon his stage, unaware of which of us might next be forced to wear the smiling mask. Holmes remained silent for some time after issuing his command that no one was to leave the theater. The company shifted uneasily beneath his gaze, the echo of his words seeming to linger among the velvet seats and hanging drapes. I could see the tension in every face, the tremor of suspicion, the fear that one of them might be hiding behind a mask far more dangerous than porcelain. Holmes paced slowly along the edge of the stage, the mask case tucked under his arm. His eyes swept across each person in turn, observing the tiniest movements. A tightening jaw. Averted glance, a twitch of the fingers. Deceit, Watson, he murmured, just loud enough for me to hear. It rarely hides in words. It breathes in gestures. He turned suddenly to Endicott. You will provide me with access to the prop room, the wardrobe, and the mechanical pit beneath the stage. I wish to see where this mask was kept and how it might have been altered." Endicott nodded quickly, clearly eager to oblige. We followed him down a narrow stairway to the underbelly of the theatre. A dim passage lined with discarded costumes, broken set pieces, and the faint, ever-present reek of gas. Holmes's lantern threw long shadows over the cluttered space. He moved like a bloodhound, stopping now and then to inspect a tool, a coil of wire, a small tin canister half hidden beneath a curtain. "Ether," he said, lifting the canister to the light. "Half empty, used in stage effects, smoke illusions perhaps," Endicott stammered. Yes, sometimes for atmospheric haze, but it was always stored upstairs." "I cannot imagine how it came here." Holmes replaced it carefully and examined the workbench nearby. "And here note the fine copper tubing. This is not standard equipment for a stage illusion. These are conduits, Watson, likely used for timed vapor release. Our killer understands both chemistry and stagecraft." He straightened, eyes glittering. "It strengthens our suspicion regarding Mr. Vale. Yet the note to Miss Vane complicates the matter. A second move in this grim performance, designed to unsettle rather than strike. A murderer who enjoys an audience often prefers suspense before the final act." As he spoke, a sudden sound broke the stillness above a faint crash, followed by a scream. Holmes was up the stairs in a flash, his coat swirling behind him like smoke. I followed close behind, my heart pounding. We burst into the main hall to find Clara Vane standing rigid near the orchestra pit, her face white as marble. At her feet lay a shattered gas lamp, its glass scattered across the boards. Endicott rushed forward. "Clara, what happened?" She pointed toward the balcony. "Someone was there, watching me. I saw the reflection of the mask in the light before it fell." Holmes seized the nearest lamp and climbed swiftly to the balcony. The air was thick with smoke and dust, and for a moment I thought I glimpsed a flicker of movement among the shadows, a figure retreating into the far exit. Holmes darted forward, but by the time he reached the door, it was swinging gently on its hinges, opening onto the empty corridor beyond. He returned a moment later, breathing hard, his expression unreadable. "Gone," he said curtly, but not unseen. He bent to the railing, running his fingers across the surface. "Watson, observe soot again, and a single fiber. Red silk. From Miss Vane's costume, perhaps, or planted to suggest it." He descended to the stage, his sharp eyes never resting. The killer was here tonight, among us. He wished Miss Vane to see him to confirm that his performance continues. Endicott was trembling visibly. "Mr. Holmes, this is beyond endurance. I must close the theatre." Holmes turned on him sharply. "Do so, and you'll never catch your villain. He thrives on darkness. But corner him beneath the spotlight, and he will falter. Keep the performance as planned tomorrow night. Announce that the show proceeds without delay. Our murderer will not resist returning for his encore." I stared at him in disbelief. "Holmes, you intend to use the performance as bait?" His lips curved faintly. "Exactly. The smiling mask will smile again, Watson, but this time it shall be upon my terms. The man who kills for theatre will die by its stage." Outside, the church bell tolled 10 through the fog, and as its echoes faded into the distance, Holmes stood upon the empty stage, staring at the broken lamp and the faint trace of soot, the faintest smile forming on his own lips, cold, calculating, and certain that the next act had already begun. The following day was one of grim anticipation. Holmes had scarcely spoken through breakfast, his mind entirely consumed by the performance he meant to stage that evening. The morning light struggled through the fog, painting Baker Street in hues of dull gold and grey. Holmes sat with the theatre program spread before him, a map of street Dunstan sketched hastily in his hand. "It is not enough, Watson," he murmured. "We know the mechanism, the means. even the style of our culprit, but not his purpose. Without that, all deductions are air and smoke. He rose abruptly and began pacing. Consider, Watson. Basil Trent dies in a manner grotesque yet precise. The killer goes to great lengths to craft a murder that mirrors the play's own plot. He then leaves a message to Miss Vane, suggesting deception among them. A second appearance, a masked figure watching from the balcony, confirms that this is no crime of chance, it is theater within theater. Every move designed for reaction. I leaned forward. You mean the killer is playing a role, performing for us? Holmes nodded. Precisely. He believes himself both author and actor. He writes his own tragedy and wishes us to applaud its unfolding. He stopped, tapping the desk with his finger. There is an intellect here, Watson, and vanity, lethal vanity. Such men crave validation. They cannot resist watching the audience gasp at their work. He turned toward me with sudden intensity. That is why he must attend tonight's performance, and when he does, I shall unmask him in front of his stage. We spent the rest of the day preparing for what Holmes called the final act. At his insistence, Inspector Lestrade was summoned to assist in the arrangements. He arrived at noon, doubtful as ever of Holmes's unorthodox plans. So you want me to hide in the theater like a stagehand, he grumbled, while your murderer strolls in and confesses himself. Not quite, Holmes replied dryly. He will not confess with words, Lestrade. He will reveal himself by instinct. A man who lives through performance cannot bear to watch another play his part. By evening, the fog had thickened into a damp, clinging shroud. Street, Dunstan's glowed faintly through the mist, its poster boards proclaiming, "The Smiling Mask." A Halloween tragedy. Crowds gathered despite the recent death. Curiosity, it seemed, was stronger than fear. Inside, the theater brimmed with uneasy excitement. Holmes, disguised as an elderly stagehand with grey whiskers and a stooped back, had already taken his post behind the curtains. I sat among the audience, my role that of an ordinary spectator, though every muscle in my body was tense with expectation. The orchestra began. The stage lights flared. The play unfolded in eerie reflection of the events we knew too well. A story of a cursed performer, a mask that drove men mad. The actors moved stiffly, their fear almost real, perhaps because it was. When Miss Vane entered for her first scene, the audience gasped. Her beauty shone beneath the light, but her hands trembled as she lifted the mask prop that Holmes had carefully replaced with a harmless replica. Then it happened. Midway through the second act, as the audience leaned forward in fascination, a shadow detached itself from the balcony above and began to move along the gallery rail. I saw it clearly, a man in dark attire, his face hidden behind that terrible smiling mask. Gasps rippled through the crowd, believing it part of the performance. Holmes's voice cut through the orchestra's swell. Now, Watson. In an instant, the stage erupted into chaos. The curtains flew back. Lestrade and his men surged forward from both aisles, their boots pounding against the wooden floor. The masked figure turned sharply, retreating toward the rear gallery. But Holmes was faster. I saw him leap from the wings like a panther, scaling the steps 2 at a time. The masked man stumbled, his cloak catching on a chair. Holmes seized him by the collar and tore the porcelain grin from his face. A collective gasp filled the theater. Beneath the mask was the pale, trembling visage of Gerard Vale. Holmes held him firm, his voice calm yet cutting. "You see, Mr. Vale, even your illusion could not conceal the truth. You engineered a death to mirror your art. But art, true art, never requires blood." Vale struggled, his composure collapsing into hysteria. He deserved it. Trent stole my design, my mechanism, my genius. He mocked me, called me a trick maker. But he wore my mask, didn't he? He became my masterpiece. Holmes's voice dropped to a whisper. "And so you killed to prove yourself the greater artist." Lestrade's men dragged Vale away as the audience sat frozen, unsure whether what they had witnessed was performance or reality. Holmes stood upon the stage, the shattered mask at his feet, its grin now fractured into a dozen mocking shards. When we returned to Baker Street that night, the fog had lifted, and the lamps glowed pale gold along the empty road. Holmes removed his disguise and sank into his chair, the faintest trace of fatigue in his eyes. There is no vanity so dangerous as that which seeks applause for evil, Watson. Our murderer composed his tragedy, but in the end, it was he who took the final bow. I glanced toward the window, where the city's light flickered faintly through the mist. "And the mask?" I asked quietly. Holmes smiled, weary but amused. "It smiles still, my dear Watson, but now only as a relic of man's foolish theatre." For several days following Gerard Vale's arrest, the case appeared concluded in the eyes of Scotland Yard. Lestrade was content, the newspapers praised the swift resolution, and the public's fascination with the Smiling Mask murder faded into the next morning's scandal. Yet Holmes was uncharacteristically silent. He smoked far more than usual, pacing the sitting room of Baker Street until long past midnight. There was something restless in his movements, a dissatisfaction that no success could soothe. "Holmes," I ventured one evening, "surely there is nothing left unresolved." Vale confessed before a full house. His motive was clear, his method ingenious. "What troubles you?" He stopped mid-stride, his gaze fixed on the dying embers in the hearth. "It is precisely that, Watson, the perfection of it all. Too exact, too conveniently theatrical. The confession was too willing, the timing too flawless. It felt rehearsed." I frowned. "You think Vale was lying?" Holmes turned toward me, the faint gleam of firelight flickering in his grey eyes. "Not entirely. I believe he believed himself the murderer, but I am not yet convinced he acted alone." Before I could speak, there came a sharp knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson ushered in a uniformed messenger carrying a telegram. Holmes tore it open, his expression tightening as he read. "From Lestrade," he said curtly. "Vale is dead, found in his cell at dawn, poisoned." I sprang from my chair. "Poisoned? But how?" Holmes was already reaching for his coat. "That, my dear Watson, is what we are about to discover." We arrived at Scotland Yard within the hour. Lestrade met us in the corridor, his face drawn with fatigue. Devil of a business, Holmes. The man was alone all night. No visitors, no disturbances. When the guard checked at dawn, he was slumped by the wall, mouth foaming. "Doctor says it's cyanide. Must have smuggled it somehow." Holmes examined the small glass vial placed upon the inspector's desk, its cork half melted by the corrosive contents. "Cyanide leaves no mercy," he said softly. "Tell me, Lestrade, did anyone handle his food or water?" "Only the gaoler, old Hennessy, and he's been with us 20 years. I'd trust him with my life." Holmes said nothing. He bent low, studying Vale's personal effects laid neatly in a small tray. A handkerchief, a pencil, and a folded note. He lifted the paper and read aloud. "The mask smiles last." He paused, then added gravely, "He did not write this, Lestrade. The ink is too fresh, the pen stroke deliberate and fluid. Vale's hand was unsteady, nervous. This, however, was written by someone calm, calculating." Lestrade blinked. "You mean someone killed him and left this?" Holmes replaced the note with delicate precision. "Or staged his death as neatly as he staged the first. The true playwright of this tragedy remains behind the curtain." We returned to Baker Street in silence. The city outside lay in gloom, the fog pressing low against the windows. Holmes sat before the fire, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. "Watson, what do we know of Percival Endicott?" I looked up in surprise. "The theatre owner? You think he had a hand in this?" "Consider," Holmes replied, "a man whose livelihood thrives upon scandal and attention. The death of an actor, followed by the arrest of a mechanic, draws crowds to his theatre. The show's fame multiplies. Yet, Even after the case closes, the play continues sold out for weeks. And now Vale dies in silence, ensuring the story never ends. Tell me, who benefits from that narrative? The proprietor, I said slowly. Endicott. Holmes rose, pulling his coat from the stand. Precisely. The smiling mask was never Vale's creation. It was Endicott's invention, both literal and symbolic. He needed a scapegoat to embody his fiction, and Vale, with his obsession for recognition, was the perfect pawn. But how can you prove it? I asked. Holmes smiled faintly, his eyes glinting with cold determination. By attending tonight's encore, Watson. Street Dunstan's opens again to a full house, and I believe its final performance will end rather differently. He turned toward the window, where the fog thickened once more, curling like smoke from some unseen fire. The theatre, my dear fellow, he murmured, is about to witness its true author take the stage, and this time the applause may sound very much like the closing of a trap. I felt a chill run through me as I followed his gaze into the darkening street. The smiling mask, it seemed, had not yet finished its performance. The curtain had merely paused between acts, and Sherlock Holmes was ready to write the ending himself. The rain had begun by the time we reached Street Dunstan's once more, a cold drizzle that turned the cobblestones slick and the air bitter. The theatre loomed out of the gloom like a sleeping beast, its lamps dim, its windows dark. Yet within, Holmes assured me, the play was already in motion. He moved with quiet purpose, his expression grim and focused, the faintest gleam of anticipation in his eyes. Watson, he said as we approached the entrance, we must tread lightly tonight. Endicott is no ordinary villain. He is an artist of deception, and like all artists, he craves an audience. We shall give him one. Inside, the theatre was nearly empty save for a few stagehands rehearsing under the dull glow of the footlights. The performance was scheduled for later that evening, a tribute to Basil Trent's memory, according to the posters now plastered along the walls. Holmes examined one briefly, his fingers tracing the printed letters. Notice the phrasing, he murmured. A memorial performance of The Smiling Mask, produced by Percival Endicott. His name larger than the title itself. A man who ensures credit follows him, even to the grave. We found Endicott in his office at the rear of the theatre, bent over a ledger. He looked up sharply as Holmes entered, his pallor ghastly under the lamplight. Mr. Holmes, he said, forcing a smile. Surely the case is closed. Why trouble yourself with ghosts? Holmes took a seat without invitation. Because one ghost, Mr. Endicott, has not yet taken its bow. Gerard Vale is dead. Endicott's expression flickered, the mask of composure, slipping just for a heartbeat. Dead? But how dreadful! The poor fellow, so tragic after his confession. Still, he brought it upon himself. Holmes studied him with that infuriating calm which had unseated so many criminals before. You speak with curious detachment for a man whose play has twice been stained with death. Tell me, Mr. Endicott, how long had you known Vale before he joined your company? Barely a month, Endicott replied. He approached me with designs for mechanical effects. Clever man, too clever, perhaps. Indeed, Holmes said softly. And yet you gave him full control of your props, allowed him access to every corner of this theatre, even after Basil Trent's death. Strange generosity for a proprietor so concerned with reputation. Endicott's hands trembled slightly on the ledger. What are you implying? Holmes leaned forward, his voice low and precise. That you needed Vale, not for his skill, but for his obsession. You planted the idea of the deadly mask in his mind, fed his pride, whispered of recognition, and when the trap was set, you let him spring it. He killed for your design, and when he began to suspect he'd been used, you silenced him in his cell. Endicott rose sharply, his face draining of color. That's preposterous. You have no proof. Holmes smiled faintly. On the contrary, I have enough to draw back your curtain. The note found beside Vale's body, the ink was theatre grade, the same formula used in your prop room. And the handwriting, though disguised, bears traces of your own, looped as short. A showman's flourish, careless in haste. Endicott stared at him, breathing hard. You can't prove I wrote it. Holmes stood slowly. Then let us test the matter. You see, Mr. Endicott, I anticipated your need for final applause. While you rehearsed your little memorial performance tonight, I arranged one of my own. Inspector Lestrade waits even, now in the wings with a constable or two eager for a seat in the audience. Endicott backed toward the desk, his eyes darting to a drawer. Holmes moved like lightning, seizing his wrist before his fingers closed around the revolver within. For a moment, the two men struggled, the chair overturned, papers scattering across the carpet. Then, with a cry of despair, Endicott sagged in Holmes's grip, the strength leaving him entirely. It was never meant to kill him, he gasped, only to frighten him, to make the play unforgettable. But when Trent fell dead, I had to preserve the illusion. Vale believed himself responsible. I let him. The theatre would have closed, the investors gone, don't you see? I kept it alive. Holmes's voice was quiet, almost pitying. Alive! You've mistaken fame for life, Mr. Endicott, and now, like your creation, you will wear the mask of your own making. Lestrade entered with two officers, and Endicott was led away in silence. Holmes stood for a long while after they'd gone, gazing at the shattered remains of the ledger on the floor. A man may create beauty from deception, Watson, he said at last, but when he begins to worship his own illusion, he becomes its prisoner. Outside, the rain had ceased. The fog hung low, heavy with the scent of the river. As we stepped into the street, Holmes glanced back once at the theatre doors. The play is over, he murmured, and the smiling mask will smile no more. The fog had thinned but not vanished, and the night air outside the theatre carried the damp chill of rain-soaked stone. Holmes and I walked in silence, our steps echoing faintly against the slick pavement. The gas lamps threw pale halos over the street, and for the first time in days there was an air of finality in our movements. Yet I sensed that Holmes's mind, though victorious, was far from restful. He walked, with his hands clasped behind him, head bowed slightly, his sharp profile cut against the yellow glow of the lamps like a carving in shadow. At last he spoke, his tone more reflective than triumphant. Watson, there are cases where deduction alone is insufficient, where the criminal's design is so theatrical that truth itself must take the stage. Endicott's genius was not in murder, but in misdirection. He built a lie so elaborate that it convinced even the man who acted within it. I looked at him curiously. You mean Vale? Indeed. Vale was not simply a pawn. He was an actor cast into a tragedy written by another. Endicott knew how to manipulate the mind that longed for recognition. He fed him admiration, praised his artistry, then placed a mask in his hand and told him he could frighten the world. Vale believed it. That belief was his undoing. Holmes stopped beside a lamppost, the rain whispering faintly on his hat. It is a strange thing, Watson, vanity, when married to intellect, becomes the deadliest of poisons. We hailed a cab, and the rattle of the wheels soon replaced the sound of the rain. I watched Holmes from the opposite seat, noting the restless energy that still charged his manner. You seem dissatisfied, I said quietly. The case is closed. Justice served. Yet you look as though the puzzle still lies unsolved. He gave a thin smile. Because, in a sense, it does. There are threads yet dangling, threads that lead not to the murderer, but to the mind of the crime itself. You see, the theatre was never merely a backdrop, it was the weapon. Endicott's art was illusion, but illusion depends upon faith. Without an audience to believe, it is nothing. He required not only victims, but witnesses. The applause was his alibi. His words unsettled me, though I could not say why. When we reached Baker Street, the lamps burned low, and the fire within our rooms was dying. Holmes shrugged off his coat, set his violin upon the table, and stared into the embers as though searching for some lingering clue among the coals. You recall, Watson, that when we first examined the mask, the interior bore a mechanism of copper and pin. That device, I later found, was not of Vale's design at all. It matched precisely the construction techniques of Endicott's workshop, the same soldering, the same narrow threading. He designed the weapon, built the illusion, then placed it in the hands of a man too proud to question its purpose. He sank into his chair and pressed his fingertips together. But what intrigues me most is not the crime, but the psychology of it. Endicott was an artist of manipulation. He understood that the human mind is drawn to spectacle, to what it can see, not what it cannot. Every clue he left was deliberate, meant to direct suspicion exactly where he wished. When one builds a perfect illusion, Watson, even the truth begins to look like a lie. The clock on the mantel struck 11. The sound seemed to pull him back from his thoughts. He reached for his pipe and filled it slowly, the tobacco crackling faintly in the bowl. Lestrade will write this as a straightforward affair, a jealous craftsman, an ambitious proprietor, a clever poisoner caught at last. But history will forget the subtler crime, the theft of perception. The man who can make others see what is not there holds power greater than any pistol or blade. I poured 2 glasses of brandy, handing one to him. The warmth of the drink seemed to ease the tension from his features. He looked toward the window where the fog pressed against the glass like the lingering ghost of the theater itself. There was a moment, Watson, he said softly, when Endicott nearly escaped. Had he destroyed that final note, I could have proved nothing. He would have stood before the world as the savior of his company, the man who turned death into drama. The audience would have applauded him, and the mask would have smiled on. I shuddered. And yet you saw through it. Holmes gave a small, distant laugh. Not at first. No man, however observant, is immune to artifice. It was only when I looked upon that cursed mask again in the evidence room that I noticed the faintest imperfection, a crack, hairline, and deliberate, running through the porcelain grin. It was the maker's mark, Watson, Endicott's signature disguised as damage. A boast in miniature. The man could not resist signing his masterpiece. The fire had burned low to embers now, the room thick with the faint haze of pipe smoke. Holmes leaned back, his face half lit by the dying glow. There is a peculiar justice in his capture, he murmured. He sought immortality through illusion, and now his name will be remembered not for art, but for deceit. The smiling mask will hang in evidence as a warning, a reminder that every illusion has a price. Outside, the bells of Westminster tolled midnight. I rose to draw the curtains, but Holmes stopped me with a gesture. "Leave them open," he said quietly. "Let the light fall where it may. We have looked too long into the darkness tonight." I obeyed, and for a time neither of us spoke. The city beyond lay half-shrouded in mist, the faint glow of lamplight reflected on wet streets. In that stillness, I thought of the faces we had seen, the dead actor, the doomed inventor, the ruined proprietor, and of the mask that had smiled upon them all. Holmes broke the silence at last. "There will always be masks, Watson. Men will wear them for vanity, for deceit, or for survival. Our task, as ever, is to look beyond the smile to the truth that hides beneath." He turned away then, the firelight dying to a soft red glimmer, and in that quiet hour, as the fog wrapped itself around the windows and London slept beyond, I felt once again that strange mixture of awe and unease that always followed our adventures, a sense that the world, for all its light, still harbored shadows, deep enough to smile back. The following morning broke pale and uncertain, with a thin mist drifting over Baker Street like the last veil of the night. The city was stirring reluctantly from slumber, carts rumbling, horses stamping in the chill. Holmes sat at the breakfast table, untouched tea beside him, the morning paper folded and refolded between his fingers. I could see that familiar glint of restlessness. His mind had not yet finished with the smiling mask. He glanced up suddenly. "Watson." It is curious how swiftly truth fades once the world has satisfied itself with a name to hang upon a crime. Endicott's arrest fills the columns, his confession accepted without question, and yet I cannot shake the feeling that something more subtle remains concealed beneath the ashes. I looked at him in disbelief. "Surely, Holmes, there is nothing further to uncover." "Endicott's guilt is beyond dispute." He gave a faint smile. "Ah, my dear fellow, you mistake the end of one act for the conclusion of the play. Do you suppose that a man such as Endicott, methodical, deliberate, obsessed with illusion, would leave the final scene to chance? No. I believe his performance continues even now, though he sits in a cell at Newgate." Before I could reply, there came a knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered, holding a sealed envelope. "Delivered by special messenger, sir." Said it was urgent. Holmes tore it open and read silently, his brows tightening. "As I expected," he murmured, handing it to me. The note was from Inspector Lestrade. "Endicott has been found unconscious in his cell. Doctor suspects deliberate poisoning. Requests your immediate attendance. Within the hour, we were on our way through the damp morning streets toward Newgate Prison. The air was heavy with drizzle, and the city seemed to watch us through 1,000 misted windows. When we arrived, Lestrade met us in the corridor, his face grim. "Holmes, he's alive, but barely. Took something hidden in the lining of his coat, we think. Doctor managed to revive him, but his mind's near gone. Keeps muttering nonsense." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Nonsense, you say? Lead me to him." Endicott lay upon the narrow prison cot, his skin pale as wax. His lips moved ceaselessly, forming fragments of words. Holmes bent low, listening, his expression unreadable. "He repeats a phrase," he said softly. "The curtain falls for none but me." Lestrade shifted uneasily. "Sounds like guilt, doesn't it?" Holmes shook his head. "No, it sounds like pride. Even now, he considers himself the author of the play. He seeks control over his own exit, nothing less." Endicott stirred, his eyes flickering open. For a fleeting moment, his gaze found Holmes. "You think you've ended it," he whispered hoarsely. "But you cannot kill a story, Mr. Holmes. It lives as long as it is told." A weak laugh escaped him, followed by a rasping cough. The mask smiles still, even without a face to wear it. Moments later, he collapsed into silence. The doctor stepped forward, shaking his head. Holmes stood unmoving, watching the still form with that grave composure which never betrayed the depth of his thoughts. At last, he turned to Lestrade. "Guard every record, every belonging of this man. There may yet be more of his theatre than we have seen." Outside the prison, the drizzle had turned to steady rain. We walked beneath our umbrellas toward the waiting cab. "Holmes," I said quietly. "What did he mean? What smile still remains?" Holmes glanced sideways at me, his face shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. "He referred not to the mask itself, Watson, but to the idea of it. Endicott built his art upon illusion, and illusion, unlike a man, cannot be buried. You may destroy the mask, but its image lingers in the minds of those who saw it, and I fear he has left one final act to be played." We returned to Baker Street that evening. Holmes immediately took to his desk, poring over papers from the theatre case letters, blueprints, and playbills. The gaslight flickered over the mess of documents as he muttered to himself. He was too careful. There must be something here that extends beyond vanity, something deliberate. He examined one of the theatre's promotional posters under a magnifying lens. "Here," he said suddenly. "Look closely at the typography, Watson." The font of the smiling mask differs ever so slightly from the rest of the text engraved rather than printed. Hidden within the letters is a faint watermark, almost invisible. It reads, Endicott and Vale Productions. I stared. But Vale was dead when this poster was printed. Precisely, Holmes replied, his tone growing intense. Endicott continued to use the name. Why? Because the true purpose of the production was not art, nor revenge, it was investment. A partnership, masked by performance. Vale built the devices. Endicott financed them, and together they planned a new kind of theater, one that blurred illusion and reality so completely that the audience could not distinguish death from drama. But once Trent died, Vale panicked. Endicott silenced him and claimed the play as his own. Holmes rose suddenly, pacing before the fire. But Endicott had a successor, someone capable of carrying on his work after his arrest. He said the story would live as long as it was told. Someone else, Watson, holds the script. At that instant, the bell rang below. Mrs. Hudson appeared with a telegram, dripping with rain. Holmes read it quickly, then handed it to me. It was unsigned, the message brief. The mask smiles again tonight at Covent Garden. I looked up in alarm. Holmes, surely not. But he was already reaching for his coat and hat. There is no time to lose, Watson. Endicott may be gone, but his illusion breathes still. The stage is set anew, and if I am not mistaken, the curtain rises within the hour. Outside, thunder rolled across the darkening sky as we hurried into the street. The fog was thicker now, pressing close like a living thing. Holmes hailed a cab with sharp urgency, his voice cutting through the rain. To Covent Garden Theatre, quickly! As the wheels struck the wet stones and the lamps blurred past us, I caught the faintest reflection of Holmes's face in the window, calm, intent, yet shadowed with something I had seen only in the gravest of his pursuits. The play, he murmured, almost to himself, was never meant to end with applause. It was meant to begin again. And in that moment, as London vanished behind sheets of rain, I knew that the case of the smiling mask was not over. It had merely changed its stage. The cab rattled furiously through the rain-slicked streets, the clatter of hooves echoing off the shuttered shop fronts as we made for Covent Garden. The storm had grown violent. Lightning flashed across the heavens, illuminating the grey sprawl of London with each jagged strike. Holmes sat opposite me, his eyes fixed on the dark beyond the carriage window, his mind clearly weaving threads I could not yet see. The telegram lay open in his gloved hand, the ink running slightly from the damp. Its message, "The mask smiles again tonight at Covent Garden," seemed to pulse with sinister promise. When we arrived, the theatre stood shrouded in fog, its great archway glistening under the lamplight. Though it was late, the building was far from silent. A handful of carriages lingered at the curb, and within we heard faint murmurs, the rustle of movement behind the velvet doors. Holmes motioned for me to follow, and we entered by the side passage, slipping unnoticed through the corridor that led to the stage. The air inside was thick with the scent of gas and damp fabric. Holmes paused near the wings, his sharp eyes scanning the dimly lit auditorium. A small audience, perhaps 20. Souls sat scattered across the seats, all facing the stage where a lone figure stood motionless beneath a weak spotlight. The figure wore a black cloak and chillingly the same porcelain mask that had haunted our investigation. Its smile gleamed unnaturally in the light. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "Good Lord," I whispered. "It can't be the same." Holmes's hand gripped my arm. "Quiet, Watson. Observe. Every illusion must reveal itself when the light shifts." The masked figure began to speak, its voice resonant and eerily calm, echoing through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight you witness the resurrection of art, the perfection of illusion, where death itself bows to performance. The mask you see before you was worn by genius, condemned by mediocrity, and destroyed by ignorance. Yet no art truly dies, for as long as eyes remain to behold it, the play continues. The voice was unmistakably that of Percival Endicott. I turned in astonishment. But Holmes, he was dead. Holmes's gaze did not waver. So it seems, my dear Watson. Yet I never saw the body laid to rest, and that omission now bears its weight. The figure raised its hands theatrically, and at that instant the lamps dimmed to near darkness. A low hiss filled the air, the unmistakable whisper of gas. Holmes moved like lightning, vaulting onto the stage as the audience began to stir in alarm. I followed, the acrid scent already tightening my chest. Holmes seized the curtain rope and yanked it down, tearing open a ventilation shaft above. "Out, Watson!" he shouted. "The fumes, quickly!" We ushered the dazed spectators toward the exits. Panic spread, but Holmes's authority steadied the crowd, his voice cutting through the confusion. Once the last had fled into the rainy street, we turned back to the stage. The masked figure was gone. Holmes snatched a lantern from the wall and swept its beam across the empty boards. A trapdoor stood open near the rear curtain. Without hesitation, he descended, and I followed into the narrow passage below the stage. The air was heavy and close, the sound of dripping water echoing down the corridor. Ahead, the faint glimmer of movement caught the light, a shadow slipping around a corner. We pursued it through the maze of corridors until we emerged into a low, stone-walled chamber. There, amid crates and abandoned props, stood the figure in black. It turned slowly toward us, the mask's fixed grin gleaming in the lantern light. Holmes advanced. "Endicott," he said, his voice low and steady. "The play is finished. The audience has left, and the curtain has fallen. Surrender this farce." The figure's head tilted. "You think death so absolute, Mr. Holmes? You think a man of creation dies in chains? The mask is eternal. I am but its voice." With that, the hand beneath the cloak lifted something, glinting a revolver. I cried out, but Holmes had already moved. He struck the lantern aside, plunging the room into shadow, and the gunshot split the air. Sparks flared briefly, and I saw the mask lurch backward, a faint groan echoing through the dark. I rushed forward, but Holmes's voice stopped me. "Careful, Watson. Theatrics to the end." He relit the lantern. The masked man lay against the wall, his cloak torn, the weapon fallen from his grasp. Holmes knelt, removing the porcelain mask. Beneath it was not Endicott, but another face, pale, thin, unmistakably that of Horace Blythe, the stage director. Holmes's eyes hardened. "So the understudy takes the role at last." I suspected as much. Blythe's lips twisted into a faint, delirious smile. He promised I'd carry his vision, that the theater would never die. The letters came even after his arrest. He planned every word, every performance, long before his fall. I only obeyed the script. Holmes's expression softened not with pity, but with the recognition of a mind broken by influence. "Endicott's true masterpiece, then," he said quietly. "Not the mask, but the man who wore it." Blythe's breath grew shallow, his gaze unfocused. "He's waiting, Mr. Holmes, behind the curtain, for the final applause." His head fell back, the ghost of a smile still frozen upon his face. We stood in silence for a long moment. The storm above rumbled faintly through the stone ceiling. Holmes rose slowly, setting the mask upon a crate. There is a particular cruelty in genius that infects weaker souls. Endicott crafted his illusion so deeply that even from the grave he compelled others to play their parts. As we emerged from the tunnels, the first light of dawn broke through the thinning clouds. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening beneath the pale sky. Holmes paused at the theater door, looking back once more at the empty stage beyond. "Endicott believed that illusion could outlive truth," he said softly. Perhaps he was right, but illusions, like shadows, fade when the sun rises. We walked in silence toward the waiting cab. London stirred around us, vendors setting up their stalls, a milk cart rattling down the street. The scent of wet cobblestones and dawn air filling our lungs. I glanced at my companion. His face was calm again, his eyes reflective yet distant. "Holmes," I said, "do you suppose the mask truly is destroyed?" He looked toward the horizon, where the first warmth of sunlight touched the rooftops. "Destroyed? No, Watson. The mask survives wherever men hide behind pretense, wherever they deceive and call it art. But remember this, it smiles only for those who mistake illusion for truth. And we, my dear fellow, must never applaud that performance." The cab turned onto Baker Street as the day brightened, washing away the last traces of fog. Holmes leaned back, closing his eyes. His voice barely above a whisper. "The play is over." And yet, as I looked out upon the city awakening under the pale London sun, I could not help but feel that somewhere, unseen, the mask still smiled in the dark.